परं ब्रह्म तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रुतिस्मृतिपुराणानाम् आलयं करुणालयं नमामि भगवत्पादशङ्करं लोकशङ्करं शङ्करं शङ्कराचार्यं केशवं बादरायणं सूत्रभाष्यकृतौ वन्दे भगवन्तौ पुनः पुनः। नमामि गौडपादं च शङ्करं श्रीसुरेश्वरं स्वामिनं सच्चिदानन्दमिन्द्रं तं ज्ञानरूपिणे। ओम नारायण नारायण नारायण। ವ್ಯವಹಾರ ಎಲ್ಲವೂ ಆಲ್ ದ ವ್ಯವಹಾರ ಈಸ್ ಡ್ಯೂ ಟು ಅಧ್ಯಾಸ. ಟುಡೇ ಈಸ್ ಫ್ರೈಡೇ. ಓಕೆ, ಸೊ ಟುಡೇ ಈಸ್ ಫ್ರೈಡೇ. Therefore Friday 9th, therefore Sugama. All the Vyavahara is due to Adhyasa. That means Vyavahara and Adhyasa are not two things. It is not that in the Adhyasa Vyavahara is found. The very Vyavahara is imposition. That means the Pramatru, Pramana, Prameya, all these things are just impositions. They are not the realities. That's what it means. Or in other words, Pramatrutvam is not the Swatasiddha Vastu. Pramatrutvam is only an appearance of Atman. Atma exists and the Pramatrutvam appears, is only a perception about the reality. Pramatrutvam is perception about the reality. Pramana is also a perception of the reality, a wrong perception. Prameya. Therefore, all these things are only thoughts about the Atman which is beyond thought. That's what he is telling here. Yasya prepsa jihasa prayuktasya pravrittihi sa pramata. Who is pramata? A person who wants to know, who wants to achieve something or avoid something, who wants to acquire something or avoid something. Such person wants to know something. Therefore, he is pramata. Then sa yena artham praminoti tat pramanam. By whatever means he understands, he is called Prama. The instrument he uses is called Pramanam. Here, Pratyaksha is Pramanam, Anumana is Pramanam. Like this, or even Shruti Pramana is a Pramanam. He uses the means to know certain things. So that is Pramanam. Yo arthaha pramiyate tat prameyam. The object that you come to know is called prameya. Then, yad artha vijnanam sa pramitihi. The knowledge which rises about a given object. The knowledge which rises about a given object is called pramiti. Now he is dividing them into four. In fact, the anubhava is one. The experience is one. While explaining, while discussing, we divide them into four. See, Pramatru, Pramana, Prameya and Prama. These four can't be established independently. All these four put together is one experience. So only while discussing, we take them separately. That means the one Anubhava looked from different angles is called by different name. It is one Anubhava, one experience called by different names from different angle of looking. From the standpoint of subject, you call him Pramatru. The same thing from the standpoint of object, you call Prameya. Subject, object, Pramatru, Prameya don't exist independently because they come into experience together. In experience is one. In that only it is an aspect. It is one aspect alone you take into consideration one aspect of it and give a name. Tatra, see, idam pramanam, now talking about pramanam. So all these four are due to adhyasa, all these vyavahara. Therefore, he says it is only a just vyavahara. Vyavahara means you are transacting, you take, you think like that. These are all thoughts, not entities. Entity is Atma. The real existence is Atma only. These are all way you take the Atma to be. The same Atma is taken to be a Pramatu, taken to be subject, taken to be an object. The same Atma is seen to be subject, object and relationship and knowledge and ignorance and all that. It is the one entity taken by different names and different forms. Therefore, these are all the way the same Atma appears. That's why they are all Vyavahara. Pramatru, Pramana, Prameyas are Vyavahara. As we were discussing in Vedanta Paribhasha in Kannada, Ishvara, Jiva are Vyavaharas. As an entity, as a truth, they are one. Ishvara and Jiva and Jagat, they are not the three. It is one truth, one pure existence is taken, is referred from three different ways, different angles. So Ishvaratvam is a way you refer to, the way you perceive the same truth. The same truth you perceive in another way and call Jiva. The same you perceive in another way, call Jagat. So Jiva, Jagat, Ishvara are three ways of, they are not three independent ways. Again remember, they are not independent way. Again they are under the misunderstanding. You have three aspects, let us say. Three aspects of one misunderstanding. So the one wrong way of looking the same Brahman is Adhyasa. In the Adhyasa, these three aspects, mutually related aspects. When you look at the same truth through a given body, it's like looking at the entire space from a location. The entire space you look from a location, then you call it a point of space. A point of space is a location. So from the point of space, then you look at the space. Space looks like spreading and away from you and all that. But if you remove the point of space, can you see the space? A point of space, then you can see the distance in the space, size in the space, near, far, areas in the space. Okay. The same space is seen as different areas, smaller area, bigger area. Okay. So location, area, extension, all these are the measurements in one space. Okay. In one space, these are the different ways of perception, different measurements, different aspects of one space, and that space can be seen in these different ways when you have a one point of space. When you take a point in a space, from that point you call this is the present location. There is an area, location, distant location, present location and a distant location. Then the relationship, then the area, then the extension. All these ideas are with divisions within the one space. Now this one space has two aspects. One is a location from which you look at, and another is different areas you look at it. Okay? Different areas, different dimensions of the space you look at by a point. Suppose you remove the point. You have no point of space. Then do you see the space something of different areas, extensions, distance, near, far, all these ideas disappear. Near, far, smaller area, bigger area, this and that, here and there, all these ideas disappear when you don't have a location, an idea, a point of space. Then the point of space, the entire space become one, non-dual, one existent. Now you no more call it a space, it becomes a non-dual existence. A non-dual means an indivisible one existence which cannot be thought in different ways and different parts. A partless, aspectless existence. Non-dual is our traditional way of telling. The modern way we can say partless, aspectless existence. Okay? It is without parts. It is without aspects. You can't divide them from different aspects into different aspects. You can't see them in different parts, but only just existence, 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 indivisible into parts and aspects and areas and ideas. It is just one existence, self-existence. So that is non-dual. So that one existence, therefore Ishvara and Jiva are the two aspects of looking at the one existence. So therefore, another thing is, so therefore Ishvara is relative to Jiva, Jiva is relative to Ishvara. Because you talk of Ishvara only assuming there is an individuality. It is an individual who looks at the Ishvara. He sees Ishvara. Then when you keep Ishvara as some entity, then you feel that you are a limited one. Unlike the all-pervasive Ishvara, unlike the total world, you are one part of it. See, a part of the world and total world. In another way of telling is, a small part of the world and the total world. The world as a total can be thought of only when you live as a part, a point within the world. A part of the world is one point in the world, a location in the world. A location in the world is a Jiva, and the world as a whole seen is Ishvara. Isn't it? A location is not a fixed location, note it. Location keeps shifting. Location can be shifted. Because when you have different locations, we call them Jivas. Different Jivas. Or you can say different Janmas. The same world, you look at the world by assuming one location, one point of space in the world, and that points keep shifting. From this point, suppose it is a big hall. Here, standing here, you look at the hall. The hall looks in one way. You shift your location, point of space, to another point. From the another point, you look at the hall. Same hall looks differently. Again, shift to another point. Like this, you can have different points in the space, in the hall. The points keep shifting. That is called Punarjanmas. The points keep shifting is a Punarjanma. But the very smallness, a smallness within the world is Jivatvam. A smallness, a location within the world is Jivatvam. A particular location, a particular point is called Janmas. You keep on shifting the Janmas. But still you remain one part of the world, not as a whole world. That is Jiva. So keeping the Jiva aspect, look at the world, the entire world looks as Ishvara. And keeping the Ishvara as somebody, one who is looking, is a Jiva. So Jiva and Ishvara are relative. One more thing we discussed in Vedanta Paribhasha is Ishvara is not a fixed thing. It's like he is Jiva and this is Ishvara. You can't say that. As we told, because we told Ishvara is relative to Jiva. Relative to Jiva, note this point, most important. For example, referring this body, taking this body as a point, as a location, as a point of view. Taking this body, when I look at the entire world, all this world is Ishvara for me. Now I take you, your body. If you take your body as a location, as a Jiva, from there you look at the world, everything is Ishvara including me. That means if you are looking at the world, you are referring yourself as a Jiva and the rest of the world is Ishvara for you, in which even I am included. If I am looking at through this body, entire world is Ishvara including you. You become Ishvara to me. That means you and all other world and the people and the nature and the society, everything becomes constitute Ishvara to me, this individual. Then to you as an individual, from your standpoint, look at every world including me, becomes an Ishvara. This is one point. Second point, the same individual can be looked from two different angles. Okay? Your same body, sense organs and mind becomes Ishvara for others. When you identify with yourself, when you identify body, etc. with yourself, you are a Jiva. and your body becomes an Ishvara for others. I gave this example in Kannada. Mother becomes a Jiva, and for her a child is born. A child and husband and the family and relatives, mother-in-law, father-in-law, mother, father, etc. They are all the society in which she is there, she is living. But mother is also mother, and all other people are Ishvara to the baby. If you look from the baby standpoint, mother is a part of Ishvara, part of the whole cosmos. And to the mother, you say the baby and the relatives and the friends, all these people are part of the world in which she is living. See? The same mother becomes a Ishvara for the baby. And the baby and all other world becomes Ishvara for mother. Therefore, Ishvara and Jiva is a relative, is a way of looking. If you look from one angle, whole thing is Ishvara. To this standpoint, to this person. And this same person becomes part of an Ishvara to the other person. If you take the other person's standpoint and look at the entire world, and all other people form the society, society forms the part of an Ishvara, part of the cosmos, then they become Ishvara to me. See, therefore, don't translate Ishvara into God. The word God or Allah or any other word, Yehovah and some such thing, have totally different connotations. So, their idea of God is developed based upon a human king ruling the world. They have taken the human society. A king rules, there is a society, and there are human beings. This is the basis for their imagination, for their theology of Bible and Quran and all others, and even Judaism. So for them, the very imagination of God and the world and the Jivas is the human society, the world, already existing world. That means their standpoint is a two common man humans. Let them call it prophet and all that. Prophet doesn't mean anything. So it is not whether prophet or human or anything. Whether it is seen by prophet or seen by human, that's not the point. The vision, the standpoint, how you look at it, that counts. That is important. You may claim to be a prophet, but your view is only ordinary human being's view. This is the thoroughly confusing Hindus, because Hindus stopped thinking. It is, you may call prophet, but the model on which the God and Jiva, Jagat is imagined is a human society. God is like a king, and based upon that they have imagined. Therefore, even the prophets, even their prophets' ideas are also based upon human society only. But here, our Jiva, Ishvara, Jagat concept is only an understanding based upon absolute truth, Ishvara. And one Ishvara, one Paramatma, one absolute truth, one absolute Brahman, appearing as a Jiva as well as Ishvara and the Jagat. These are the three different aspects of one misunderstanding about the absolute truth. Okay? Therefore, Jiva, Ishvaras are relative, where even this thinker, the Jignasu, the Sadhaka is included in the part of the world. So therefore, our understanding of Jiva and Ishvara is based upon Brahma, based upon Vedanta. Therefore, our Karma Kanda, our Upasana Kanda, our rituals, our Dharma Shastra is ultimately culminates in Brahma Tattvam. So Vedantic truth is the final truth. Based upon it, our Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda is developed. Swamiji wanted to write a second volume for Paramartha Chintamani. Unfortunately, it didn't come up. But here and there, in a scattered idea, Swamiji stated. But Krishna Swami here in his book, Vedanta, the Science of Reality, he discussed these things. How Vedanta is the basis for the Karma Kanda and Upasana Kanda. This is most important, and first Hindus don't know Vedanta, most of the Hindus. And they also don't know that our Karma, Upasana, Kandas are derived, our Dharma Shastra, Upasana Shastra, all these are derived from the Vedantic idea, Vedantic vision of truth. Therefore, if you take them to logical conclusion, your karma, rebirth, God, and etc., the cyclic birth of Jagat, all these things are ultimately lead you to one Brahman truth. And the one Brahman understood in a limited angle, in a limited circumstance, appears as a Upasana Shastra and Karma Kanda, Dharma Shastra. See, Dharma Shastra, Upasana Shastras are applying or trying to understand the absolute truth to a given situation, to your limited situation. Therefore, our Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda is based upon Vedanta. So don't equate Hindu Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda with Abrahamic religions. Because their religious ideas of God, Jagat and etc. is purely human standpoint alone. They don't have the Vedantic truth as a basis to have their concept of God and creating the world and Jiva and the heaven and hell and then falling and Satan. The Satan, there is a Satan who tempts and then you fall, you disobey God and God curses you, throws you out of garden. And then again he sends one son or a last prophet to uplift you and sends you to heaven. All these ideas are just a human world and human society. Okay, this difference I want to say repeatedly. I don't know how people are not understanding. The Hindu Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda has Vedanta as the basis. Therefore, the absolute truth understood in a limited context. Therefore, it may look limited, but the idea itself is extended logically. You take it to logical end, it will again culminate into absolute truth, absolute Paramatma. Okay? So the karma, upasana, whatever your Rama upasana, Krishna upasana, Devi, Lalita, we have got temples, and you see the idea of temples also. The yajna-shalas, the temples, the upasanas, even the human social understanding of varnashrama vyavastha, all these things are based upon absolute Brahman. Okay? Therefore, this people are unable to see, and then there is a confusion Hindus are unable to understand. And they can't understand anyway, because their idea is not very deep anyway. Therefore, they cannot understand. It is no wonder that they can't understand. In fact, they try to see all nothing nonsense in Vedanta. If you look at the biblical concept of God, Jiva, creation, falling, heaven and hell and Satan, you take these things and try to understand, try to give explanation in a Vedantic way. Let me see. You try to extend it to Vedantic way, they struggle hard. Some people tried. Some Swamis tried to give the biblical idea. Vedanta, they try to derive in the biblical ideas. They struggled hard that Satan comes, you touch the apple and then you fall down and then all that. They tried to struggle hard and it doesn't suit. Because Vedanta doesn't fit into this concept, because this idea is purely based upon a human society, a king ruling the world and people are there, that's all. You disobey the king, gets angry and he will throw you out into some other land, some other area. And again you believe him, and then somebody comes and then saves you, some prophet, and you believe him, and then all that. It looks too normal. However, you try to extend logically, it won't reach Vedanta. It won't culminate in Vedanta. Therefore, they are trying to misinterpret Vedanta to suit their own thinking. And Hindus are thoroughly confused. Hindus confused because they have lost their Hinduism. They cease to be Hindus, then naturally you will be confused. What else can happen? You lose your Hindu ground. The Hindu vision of Vedanta as well as the karma and upasana. Karma, upasana, Vedanta, all three put together is Hinduism. Note this. Don't put Vedanta outside Hinduism and call Hinduism is something else. This nonsense is utter foolishness. Developed during the period of our slavery. So this nonsensical interpretations started during our period of slavery, period of 20th century or even 19th century. And when the slavery period gone, why do you retain that slavish interpretations? Okay, the slavish Vedanta, I call it. It is all slavish Vedanta. Putting Vedanta outside Hinduism and reducing, this is what I think you should study Rajiv Malhotra in these things. Deconstructing, Western Indologist to deconstructing. This is a very important idea. It's a great discovery. It's a very, very great discovery. A process of deconstruction. Do you know that? They try to study anything of Hinduism. In Hinduism, there is one system as a whole. You study it by dividing into parts. You divide the parts take one part which suits your system of your biblical system, and then throw away the rest and call it negatively, misinterpret it, and throw it out and destroy it. This is what a deconstruction process. It is the real thing that is happening. The real slavery of Hinduism is this deconstruction process of the Western Indologists. And even now we are implementing, Hindus are implementing this. They impose it on us, they criticize us, they abuse us, and we feel happy that it is a blessing to us and start interpreting, start looking at us through their own inimical ideas. Okay? They have a hostile view towards us, and we take that hostile view and to start implementing as a new discovery of Vedanta, new discovery of Hinduism. And this is a slavery. Whoever puts Upanishads and Vedanta outside Hinduism and then deny that it doesn't belong to Hindus. Nowadays some yogis also started. This thinking started in 19th, 20th century, at the end of 19th century. Then everybody, it is like a monkey finding a coconut. Or in Kannada they call Mangaki Manikya Sikkida Hage. Mangaki Manikya. A monkey found a coconut, it doesn't know how to open it. It doesn't know how to break it, it doesn't know how to eat it inside. But it looks very attractive. Similarly, this putting Vedanta Upanishads outside Hinduism and condemning Hinduism as superficial or nonsense and all these things, putting yoga outside Hinduism, putting Vedanta outside Hinduism as if it doesn't belong to Hindus. Hindus accidentally discovered it. This kind of a slavish mind, slavish thinking. This is a slavish Vedanta and a slavish yoga. Okay? This is a slavish Hinduism. Because we picked it up during our slavery days, and our gurus also continued in that slavery. Now the Shishyas are sincerely following this slavish Vedanta and slavish yoga. Okay, now this is becoming very popular now. Modern youngsters love the slavery because it is a very sophisticated English medium slavery. A sophisticated English medium gurus who speak only in English, and their body is here, their mind is elsewhere. Their mind is in America, their body is in India. And their mind is filled with Western Indologists. Okay? So, this is the peculiar thing. Until you throw away these gurus, you throw away these gurus, you come back to Shankara Bhashya, you come back to Upanishads, Purana. As generally we daily we pray to Shankaracharya. Through this our shloka is a very beautiful shloka. Shruti Smriti Purananam Alayam Karunalayam Namami Bhagavat Pada Shankaram Loka Shankaram. Shruti Smriti Purana. Take this Shruti Smriti Purana together as one. Smriti Puranas are expansions, commentaries on Shruti. Veda and Upanishads are commentated, explained, elaborated, okay, by the Smriti and Purana. Don't put one against another. Okay, Shankaracharya commented on Upanishads. Don't put Shankara against Upanishad and Upanishads against Shankaracharya. This is called English medium Vedanta of 20th century. 19th, 20th century, these English medium Swamis, international English medium Vedanta, they created this division between Upanishads against our Hindus and Hindus against Upanishads. Okay? Because this is a product of our slavery. I discussed all these things in Kannada talks, in the last 2 talks. So I thought, let me explain these things. Summarized it. I have not elaborately discussed. Summarized it in at least in English talk, in Sugama. Because the problem with India is there are too many languages. If you speak in one language, other fellow doesn't know. And if it has to reach all over India, it has to be translated into all 14 languages of India. Anything you say, it has to come into 14 languages of India. Then it reaches, even if you translate it, it may not reach all people. Because we have got too many gurus, misleading gurus, And then the attractive gurus. Attractive and misleading gurus. For them, attracting is important than the truth. They talk. They present attractively, one side alone. The comprehensive vision is missing. The comprehensive tradition is missing. Because they themselves came from outside tradition. They don't come under the tradition. Therefore, this one side, this is what Rajiv Malhotra used in his own language as deconstruction. Deconstruct means you take the whole structure and break into pieces, and take one aspect which suits their Western thinking, and remaining call them as useless. It is something like you find a person and you need a kidney. You break his parts and take out the kidney. 2 kidneys you take out. You take out the 2 kidneys, what happens? Do you think the person will survive? You take out the kidneys from him, or you take the heart out of him, and the person dies, and then you say he's a useless person. He doesn't have even a heart. He doesn't have even a kidney. How can he live? Just throw him into dustbin. Okay? Throw him as useless. Once you remove the kidney, naturally person will die. You have to see the person whole along with his kidney, along with his heart. No. First, we don't look at the whole person because we need the kidney. Therefore, we take away the kidney, pick up the kidney from him, and look at the remaining person without kidney. Okay? You put the person outside his kidney. You put the person outside his kidney. Call him, oh, he is wrongly born. The nature has committed a mistake. He is born without kidney. What a wrong person he is. Okay? You start calling him, the nature has committed a mistake. Here is a person without kidney. How can he survive? He can't survive. So throw him out. This is what exactly they are doing. You deconstruct. You divide into parts. Pick up whatever you like, what suits you, and criticize the remaining thing as useless. All Hinduism is useless. You put Vedanta outside Hinduism and condemn Hindu Karmakanda Upasanas. See? You condemn Karmakanda Upasana because you put Upanishad outside it. There is one person, even now comes to Bangalore Karyalaya. He is stubbornly, terribly hostile fellow, but is very proud that he knows Vedanta better than anybody on the earth. Anybody on the earth. And he has got his own interpretation. He goes around and he writes articles to our magazine also. Our magazine editor is so great that he publishes only his articles. I also asked him, why do you publish such useless articles, pervert articles? He has got very strange explanation to give. The editor, actual editor, not the name written on it, the actual editing person. Okay? And this person has got a temerity to say, audacity to say, what? Vedanta doesn't belong to Hinduism. It's outside Hinduism. Then what is Hinduism? Hinduism is superficial, nothing. You remove his heart from the person and say, what is there? He is a dead fellow. It doesn't deserve to be looked at. You take out the heart and call him dead person. You remove the Vedanta from Hinduism and then you blame Hinduism, criticize Hinduism. This is what Rajiv Malhotra diagnosed it long before, 10 years ago at least. His books have come out. Many Hindus have read it. This our Bangalore Guru who comes to our Bangalore Karyalaya. He lives still in the same slavery mindset. Bold slavery, very proud slave. A proud pervert fellow. Can you see how terrible our Hindus are? Terrible Hindus are. He found a great wisdom in that. You remove the heart from him and blame Hinduism. What a wisdom he discovered, this person. Even after pointed out, even after I too criticized, spent 2 to 3 classes, I have wasted 2 or 3 classes only to address him. In fact, all other audience felt very unhappy. Why criticizing and analyzing so much to that person, a stubborn person who is brainless fellow, who is incapable of understanding, a slave. Why wasting my time? But even after wasting time, he continues in the same thing. Not only he continues, he starts writing his articles to our magazine. Our magazine editor also so proudly and happily publishes that. Because this is the perversion. Terrible fellows. And our Indian editors of our magazine love it. Love this deconstruction, this slavery, this destroying of Hinduism, destruction of Vedanta. Our editors love. Okay. I personally spoke to him, our acting editor, not the nominal editor. The editor whose name is there, the person may not edit, but the actual editor is different. His name is not written, but he edits. His name is not written on the magazine, but he is the one who edits. See, this is the strange thing. You write anything, we will publish, that's all. You talk any nonsense, we'll publish it. That's all. We have become shameless people. Okay? When you lose your brain, what else you become? Except to be a shameless person. Therefore, Jiveshwara Vibhaga, it is there already in Shankara Bhashya. In spite of Shankara explaining, in spite of Sachidananda Swamiji explaining, still that Western Indologist influence is so much. Our 19th century, 20th century English medium international gurus who try to put Vedanta outside Hinduism and then condemn Hinduism, they have become so popular. They put yoga and Vedanta outside Hinduism. They have become so popular that they are very attractive and all our younger generation follow him. Of course, there are lucky, intelligent people have recognized this mistake and they are openly opposing it. There are some youngsters have recognized it. They reject him now. But still he is very powerful and attractive. There are people to support him. Okay. Because this has become a very fashionable trend. Gurus also have got fashions. They don't follow the truth. They don't teach the truth. They teach fashions. They follow the fashions. Gurus also follow the fashion, not the truth. That's why rishis are presented in a simple dress, in a village dress, in a forest dress. That means they don't go by cities changing weather, like England's changing weather. Rishis are presented in a natural way with a long beard. That means there is no barber available for shaving. And the way they live is they bear the bark and live in the forest. The idea is they live close to nature. They don't follow the fashions. They go to the truth. They go to the core of the truth. They go to the truth and understand the truth and teach the truth. They don't go by these changing fashions, attractions. Whichever has got an attraction in the society, in whichever present period, something has got an attraction, therefore you teach it. Therefore our rishis know the truth and teach the truth. They are not the modern bearded gurus and yogis who get attracted by the society's fashion and they also become fashionable gurus. Whichever fashion is prevalent in the society, they use that and want to become popular. Okay? And you have got a style of English and your attractive English and your style of talking. And you have got your own modern foolish arguments. That Einstein discovered gravitational force. Therefore, they call that is gravitational Christian? Because it is discovered by what is his name? Einstein. But Einstein is not Christian. Einstein is a Jew. But anyway, now this is the very how to say, a false logic. It is not the falsity or right logic that is important these days. It is the fashion. What is fashionable is a great logic. What is out of fashion is wrong. Okay? It's not right logic, wrong logic. It is not being logical or illogical. Logical, illogical is gone now. What is fashionable, what is attractive, what is popular? If you are a popular guru, any nonsense you say, it gets attracted. People say, I'm so convinced, you opened my eyes. There are some followers also to say. Followers give certificate to guru. Okay? Followers give certificate to guru. He's a great guru because I am very impressed by him. I like him, I get attracted. Do you say Shvetaketu giving certificate to his guru? Do you see Nachiketa giving certificate to Yamaraja in Kathopanishad? Okay? Does Nachiketa give certificate to Yamaraja, or Yamaraja gives certificate to Nachiketa? Does Shvetaketu give certificate to Uddalaka, or Uddalaka gives certificate to? Does Arjuna give certificate to Krishna, or Krishna gives certificate to Arjuna? Does Bhagavan Krishna certify Arjuna that you have got a Daivim Prakriti Mashrita, you have got a Daivi Prakriti, don't worry, you can follow your Dharma and you follow your Karma Yoga and you will understand truth, don't worry. Arjuna is a questioner, Sri Krishna answers, Bhagavan Krishna. But to our modern gurus, Arjuna gives certificate, oh, I am impressed by Krishna. Krishna is a great guru, great teacher. Krishna says, thank you that I have got many followers who have certified me, who approved me. Arjuna approves Krishna's that yes, his teaching is very good. I am impressed. He has opened my eyes. Therefore, he is a great guru. The fashionable gurus are certified by disciples, certified by persons who do not know. This is the modern fashionable gurus. Okay? Guru feels very happy. Oh, thank you that my followers have certified me. What do you call this? That's why the rishis lived a simple life. Simple life means they don't depend upon your approval. Ajnani's approval. They don't depend upon others. Okay? They don't go by fashion. They don't go by, they teach not to attract people. They teach the bare truth. If you are interested in truth, you can learn. But we don't sacrifice the truth for sake of being attractive and being fashionable. Okay? Internationally, you go and try to impress people and try to talk and praise anything. You praise people, praise anything just to be attractive, just to be accepted by people. Okay? This is a fashionable Vedanta, attractive Vedanta, to please Vedanta. That's why rishis are presented simple people. People may come, receive teachings. They serve the rishis, learn from them and benefited. But rishis' attention is towards the truth, not towards the people, not towards the attractiveness of the people. How people receive me, how people get attracted to me, or whether they give money, whether they give me name and fame, whether they become followers, he just doesn't look at it. His attention is turned towards the truth. He may be compassionate. The gurus are compassionate in trying to help the students to understand. Their compassion only comes up to that. Because unconditional love, unconditional kindness to help the jignasus. That's all. But not becoming fashionable, getting attracted and compromising the truth and talking any nonsense, trying to put Upanishads outside. Vedanta is outside Hinduism. Vedanta is universal. As if it is a part of Hindu Shastras, it becomes a narrow-minded. See, if Vedanta all these days remained before 19th century, Vedanta remained part of Hinduism. Was it narrow? Only in 19th century, end of the 19th century, when it went to America, then when they called it Upanishad is outside Hinduism, then it became universal. Before that, it was not universal. It was not talking universal truth. Was Upanishad not teaching Brahman? Was Upanishad not talking Satchidanandam Brahma? Only it became universal, now it is talking Brahma. This is a very strange logic. Therefore, what do you call all this? Somebody called it as a Janaranjaka Upadesha. Janaranjaka means appeasing, pleasing Vedanta. You have to please the audience, say something to please the audience. But rishis never paid attention to audience. Audience may be 1%, 2%, 10%, 100%, 1,000 people or any number of people. His attention is on the truth. People have to learn the truth if they are interested. He doesn't compromise the truth. That's why he lived a simple life in the forest. Beard grows, his clothes are simple, or he wears the bark, drinks the water in the river, eats the fruits, or somebody begs somebody's food and lives somewhere there in a simple life. That means it doesn't try to impress people, doesn't get attracted, nor he feels what is attractive alone is Vedanta. What pleases you is Vedanta. By social consideration, political considerations, Vedanta cannot be changed or interpreted. Truth is just the truth. It is independent of anybody. Independent of social, economic, political considerations. Okay, so we say putting Vedanta outside Hinduism is ridiculous. It is destroying Vedanta as well as Karmakanda. It is both. Destroying Hinduism as well as Vedanta, which is a part of it. Both are equally destroyed. This is deconstruction. It is something like somebody came to rob your house. Next day he got up and saw, oh my God, we have lost a lot of money, we have lost very valuable things of house. And then you see the door is open, it is broken. Some thief has entered in the night. After seeing it, what do you say? Two ways of reacting. One is, oh my God, you feel very sad that you have lost a lot of valuables from home. And the next time you think of preserving those valuables, hard work, you earn the valuables and keep in such a place that it will not be lost. It is not easily available to any thief. And then doors also, you keep such a strong doors. You build the strong doors so that no thief can enter hereafter, and be more careful and protect your property. This is one reaction. There is another reaction is, you feel inspired that, oh my God, it's a good idea that you rob the property of your house. After robbing your house, a few more things, valuables remained at home. Next morning, you also rob a few points of your house. Your parents are worried, oh, we lost a few things. And as the parents are crying, what will you do is, you follow the footsteps of the robber, unknown robber in the night, unknown thief in the night who entered your house. You follow him. And you also steal few more points. And the parents of the house see that last night we lost more valuables, but this night we lost a few more things. This person feels inspired by a thief and wants to imitate a thief in stealing your own things of your own house and become a friend of the thief. Okay, what do you call this fellow? How do you describe this person? This is what is the fate of Hindus. Due to our invasion, due to our Western Indologist work, Hindus have become disciples of Max Muller, disciples of Indologists. They praise the Max Muller as a rishi, German rishi and all. And later, and all our followers became German's interpretation of Vedanta. And first thing you learn is Upanishad is outside Hinduism. Upanishads are outside Veda. Vedanta is outside Veda. And you call the Karmakanda rishis as priests, only priests alone. Upanishadic rishis are prophets. Okay? Call the Upanishadic rishis are prophets. And Karmakanda rishis are Vedic rishis, you call them as priests. What is this? What is this explanation? What is this language? These are all language of slavery, borrowed language of our enemies, of our invaders. You borrow our invaders' language. In the same example of stealing from your own house, and the parents suspected his own son that he has stolen a few more things. Last night when thieves have entered the house, and this morning when they found this night again, a few more things are missing. They suspected their own son. They asked him, hey, you boy, my dear boy, what is this? We saw some more valuables last 2 days ago, and again in the last night we found few more things. Again today we find that few more things are missing. What are you doing? You should have protected it. What were you doing? The parents ask the son. You know, son, what he says? I am following in my footsteps of my predecessor. Who is your predecessor? The other robber, other thief. Other thief was his predecessor. So for our Hindus, Max Muller is our predecessor Rishi, German Rishi. So that we follow in the footsteps of German Rishi. No, I don't say that all foreigners are robbers alone. There are some foreigners, very good people, sincerely study Vedanta, sincerely understand Vedanta. They also have become some rishis, good rishis. There are some people who have really understood Vedanta, studied well, and they have become very good, ideal and respectable people for us. I'm not generalizing. There are exceptions. A few people are there, but most of the people are Indologists are different. So in any case, you will always find few good people, respectable, honorable, respect. You can't generalize anything in life. Anything in life, I tell you. There are always few exceptions. Good people. So that you should keep in mind. So I'm not condemning anybody and everybody like that. There are good, respectable, sincere seekers of truth. They learn and they follow. In fact, they have understood also Vedanta. They have understood Atma Tattvam. That I am Brahman is a matter of their experience. Anywhere in the world, people can understand the truth. Of course, if you follow the sadhana, if you follow the Vedanta Vichara, anybody can learn the truth. Anyway, now I am talking the general trend in the society. It should not happen. Because this general, see, those who are rare people are not followed. Only what is popular alone, people get attracted and follow them. The rare exceptions are bold people. They go to the real truth. They don't just go to, they give up the attractive thing. Shreyascha preyascha manushya metah. The Kathopanishad is very beautiful. One is the truth, another is attractive thing. He uses the word very beautifully in Kathopanishad. One is attractive, another is the reality. You go by the truth which may not be attractive, or go by the attractive which is not the truth, which is only attractive but not the truth. But the truth itself may not be attractive, but it goes just by the truth. So people have to choose between them, whether it is attractive, you love attractive or you love the truth. Those who give up the truth and go by the attractiveness will become another slaves only. Therefore, Upanishad is applied to a given situations. In a Karma Kanda, Upasana Kanda, to a limited situation. Therefore, the idea looks so small. But if you go to the logical end, it again reaches the absolute Vedanta. Okay, this is a little deviation, but it's an important point I told. Anyway, we will continue in the next class. Vyavahara is Adhyastha. This is my point. Okay, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.